It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars show, and on this week's episode, we have a bit of an update of the post-Rise of Skywalker film from Rey actress Daisy Ridley, an update on the Skeleton Crew timeline, where does it fall within the MANDO-verse live-action releases, and a handful of physical releases. Live-action Disney Plus shows coming on DVD. Thank you so much for checking out My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. Let's get into this week's episode.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
And welcome to it, My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. I'm your host, John Justice, and you like science fiction, or else you wouldn't be checking out this week's episode. I hope you'll support My Nerd World and pick up your copy of the EMBARK science fiction space opera series. An exciting mix of the Fast and Furious, Star Wars, Ready Player One, and the science fiction adventures of my youth between the 70s and the more recent 2000s. 7 books in all in the series, available in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Head on over to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, John, J-O-N, Justice, and check out the science fiction series for yourself.
Will you have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down?
So what have you been watching Star Wars-wise? Drop me an email, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. I don't know if you're like me. I'm pretty much watching something Star Wars-related every week, and currently I've been on a rewatch of Mandalorian Season 1 and been enjoying every single moment of it. I've had some distance from the Mandalorian series, and so it's nice to go back, especially as we head into the holidays, because The Mandalorian Season 1 came out around the holidays. I really enjoyed that, relatively speaking now, brief time period when we were getting live-action films and they were coming out over the holiday season, waiting for trailers to drop. It kind of felt like a part of the seasonal festivities, and unfortunately, that's not happening anymore, and probably isn't going to return for quite a long time, since it looks like the next movie we'll be getting will take place in May, with potential releases in December going into, I believe, 2027. So we'll get into a bit more of that later on in the episode. But speaking of the live-action Disney Plus streaming series, if you're feeling like Sabine Wren and just want to bring Ezra Bridger home, according to the article from StarWars.com, we have some good news for you, especially if you're like me and you're a fan of the physical releases. In December, AHSOKA, the complete first season, and the most recent adventures of The Mandalorian and Grogu, The Mandalorian, the complete third season, will both arrive on collectible physical media. Now, the pre-order starts on October 31st. The sets mark the first time that these seasons of the Emmy-nominated Star Wars shows will be available on their own, like the previous Lucasfilm collector editions released earlier this year, including Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor Season 1. Each of the new releases will be available nationally on 4K UHD Steelbook with brand new box art, collectible concept cards, and other bonus materials. Additionally, the 4 titles will be the first Disney Plus originals to include the 4K Ultra HD Dolby Vision, along with the Atmos audio for the home theater experience, with stunning visuals and immersive cinematic sounds and extra bonus features along with them. Eventually, I'll probably pick up all 3 seasons of The Mandalorian. I probably won't be doing Andor or Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, respectively. I will absolutely, though, be pre-ordering AHSOKA, the complete first season, don't need to continue to mention my love of that particular series. And I'm a big fan of physical media and the quality of picture you get with physical media. I know we're getting 1080p on our streaming, but for me personally, it drives me nuts when you get into those darker scenes, especially when it comes to Star Wars and the number of scenes that take place in space. You just don't get the same type of clarity and too much of the blocky pixelation with the compressed streaming. And so I'm glad that I'll have the opportunity to pick up my favorite live-action Star Wars Disney Plus streaming show in AHSOKA in a physical format. Now, sometime I'm sure we'll be able to get the Skeleton Crew in a physical format. Be that as it may, we have to actually get the series first, which brings us to the second news item on this week's episode.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So we know that with the MANDO verse, consisting of the Book of Boba Fett, AHSOKA, and The Mandalorian, this is telling a much larger story that will eventually culminate not only in the Mandalorian and Grogu film, but also with a Dave Filoni directed film that will basically end all of the Mandoverse storytelling in one film. Think of one of the Avengers films. Endgame is probably the best example, heading into the sequel trilogy. Well, the latest issue of Empire Magazine includes a feature on the upcoming Skeleton Crew live-action TV show set in the Mandoverse era. Now, most importantly, it notes that the Skeleton Crew is set concurrently with The Mandalorian and AHSOKA. It seems this is as precise as Disney aimed to get with placing the show in the timeline, likely to prevent the kind of confusion that we saw with The Mandalorian Season 3. So, how exactly does the timeline work out? Before I get to that, though, let's go back a bit, because there is some overlapping taking place within The Mandalorian Season 2, the introduction of AHSOKA, what we see in the AHSOKA series and what takes place in The Mandalorian. I'm not going to break it all down right now, but those series are sort of also taking place concurrently. When you look at we meet AHSOKA, it is taking place actually within the timeline of the AHSOKA series as it relates to catching Morgan Elsbeth, who we obviously know that she fights in The Mandalorian Season 2 and is imprisoned by the time we get to the start of the AHSOKA series. The Mandalorian Season 1 initially kicked off 5 years after Return of the Jedi, 4 years after the fall of the Empire at the Battle of Jakku. The core problem has always been is that there is evidently been some passage of time since then. A lot's happened. So precisely how much time? Matters came to a head with a debate over how long Grogu trained with Luke Skywalker. Favreau seemed to suggest that Grogu had been with Luke for years, while Filoni had suggested that it was more months. A whole slew of contradictory statements led to massive confusion within the fan base. Empire's comment about Skeleton Crew needs to be read in this context. It seems Lucasfilm is backing down from any sense of precision, presumably intending to update the timeline of the Star Wars TV shows when the current overarching narrative is complete, as I mentioned, culminating in that Dave Filoni film. There's a sense in which it makes sense. It prevents any more confusion, but it's also a bit frustrating. Because the right solution would surely be for the various creatives to sit down and actually go and work it out. That said, the open-ended statement about Skeleton Crew is interesting because it leaves the door open for potential cameos, which wouldn't necessarily contradict anything because the shows don't precisely overlap. Now, the one thing that we have not received an update on is whether or not the Skeleton Crew is going to be directly connecting into that larger Mandoverse storytelling. I'm of the opinion that it more than likely is. We know that one of the pirates that was featured, especially in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, is a featured character in Skeleton Crew. And I think there's also a possibility that that distant galaxy that Ahsoka and Sabine ended up being trapped on might even be playing a role in Skeleton Crew, and perhaps could play a role in what eventually should be the return of Ahsoka and Sabine back to the standard galaxy that we're all used to we're all used to the storytelling taking place in. Just assumptions on my part, not based off of any evidence whatsoever. I'm lukewarm. I'm anticipating Skeleton Crew. I wasn't all that impressed or enthused over the trailer. The suburban feel, while it's something we've never seen before in Star Wars, is something that could certainly exist in Star Wars. That being said, didn't quite line up with me. I'm used to seeing different types of civilization within Star Wars. Not to say it can't exist, but it seemed a little bit too on the nose of a one-on-one comparison to what we would see typically within storytelling of, say, Stranger Things. Top of mind because I'm doing a rewatch of Stranger Things currently. All that being said, I'm a massive Star Wars fan, and because of that, I'm certainly looking forward to Skeleton Crew just because I enjoy checking out all Star Wars content. As always, your thoughts on any of what we've been sharing on the show this week, drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or if you're enjoying the show on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment there.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
All right, so Screen Rant has a rather interesting rumor report relating to not only the post-Rise of Skywalker Daisy Ridley-led film, but also Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi. Before I dive into some potential moves of when these films will be shooting and release dates, I want to make mention just briefly that Daisy Ridley was actually at one of our Vikings home games here in Minneapolis, Minnesota last weekend. Now, I wasn't at the game personally, but I had my producer on the show who was and sent me a video of the Jumbotron that, sure enough, showed Daisy Ridley in one of the sideline suites wearing a Vikings jersey. What she was doing in Minneapolis, I have no idea. However, it was cool to see that Ray actually made a visit to the Twin Cities, and I thought I would share it with you on the show. She also has made some comments recently while out promoting a new film of hers, and we'll talk a little bit about what she had to say of the new Jedi Order movie that there was some talk, mentioning it on the show several weeks back, that it may have been canceled. However, we have an update. I'll share that with you in a second. But let's start off with the Screen Rant article that says Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi, working title, is going to be filming soon. The upcoming prequel, set earlier than any other movie in the franchise, to be directed by James Mangold, and from a screenplay written by Mangold and Beau Willimon, and/or in House of Cards, respectively. Mangold himself has been nominated for 2 Oscars, once as the screenwriter for 2017's Logan film, and once as a producer for his directorial effort, Ford vs. Ferrari, one of my favorite non-Star Wars films. Fantastic picture, which was nominated for Best Picture. Other franchise efforts helmed by Mangold include The Wolverine and the Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which I enjoyed. I've watched it twice. Should have been a lot better than what it was, but it was enjoyable for it being an Indiana Jones film. Now, per Empire Magazine, Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi, again working title, is set to commence production in the near future. During an interview promoting his new Timothée Chalamet-led Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown, James Mangold revealed that once his work on the project, which comes with quite a bit of Oscar buzz itself, is over, he will be shooting the new Star Wars movie. Thus, the movie could potentially kick off production by the end of 2025. Now, this is the firmest update that has come from one of the upcoming Star Wars movies, other than the Disney Plus series follow-up, The Mandalorian and Grogu, in quite a long time. While Lucasfilm recently recommitted to 3 movies from the franchise, coming between 2026 and 2027, while at D23, the previously announced movies on the roster had not received any updates in quite a bit of time. The Mandalorian and Grogu, directed by Jon Favreau, being worked on also with Dave Filoni, is currently in production, set to premiere on May 26th of 2026. Now, in addition to Dawn of the Jedi, the upcoming titles that have previously been announced include the new Jedi Order movie, again, working title, which is set to feature the return of Daisy Ridley as Rey. Now, that project has also seen some movement. Ridley teased at a recent Collider event that things are evolving. These 2 updates have come over the course of the same week, which would indicate that some of the franchise is indeed preparing to make good on its D23 promise. Daisy Ridley also went on to say that there would be an update soon regarding that. Now, things are evolving. That could take on a lot of different meanings. It could be what I'm referring to in this Screen Rant piece, that simply timelines are changing and shooting schedules are changing, or it could be perhaps evolving in the way the story is being written or its director. I've very much been of the opinion that because of the pressure that Disney is facing via Lucasfilm to put out a solid Star Wars product, I think they have a lot of faith in The Mandalorian and Grogu, but that film, I imagine, as it's being targeted, is probably expecting to get less in terms of box office return than what we would typically see from a saga franchise film. Whereas a Daisy Ridley-led movie essentially being an episode 10 would more than likely be looked at as needs to be a billion-dollar blockbuster. And I've never seen Charmin Obaid-Chinoy being the director to go and produce that particular film. So, remains to be seen. There's been no evidence to say that she's off the project. Just my speculation that I would think they would go with a more seasoned director than that particular documentary filmmaker who doesn't have a lot of major film prowess in terms of storytelling. Really, it just ends up being the work that she did on Ms. Marvel on the Disney Plus streaming platform. Now, the update in production for Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi, as the article goes on to say, is exciting, as there have been no feature films from the franchise since 2019 and The Rise of Skywalker, which was a critical and commercial disappointment. Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch. Listen, in terms of its feedback, yes, the critical response. But in terms of its box office return, that film still did very well. On top of the anticipated The Mandalorian and Grogu, the fact that there is indeed motion on the upcoming prequel means that the franchise may have finally shaken off the doldrums caused by the movie's underperformance. Additionally, this indicates that the movie's production progress puts it perfectly in place for bigger updates to come during the Star Wars celebration in 2025. Listen, there's a lot of hesitation that Disney and Lucasfilm are facing right now, and it's incredibly unfortunate that that is indeed the case, because I really feel like it's held them back from giving us a theatrical release up until what we're expecting in 2026. I don't have a ton of faith that they've course corrected. We're only going to know when they start releasing new content, and right now, the big question mark currently, what we're waiting for is Skeleton Crew and whether or not that's going to be a success, especially in the wake of what turned out to be a fail in The Acolyte. As always, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or drop me a comment on YouTube.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Just highlighting one piece of listener feedback this week comes from friend of the show, Star Wars as Santa. As always, I encourage you to go on YouTube and check out his fantastic weekly content. He writes, Favreau, the Feige of Star Wars. Talked about this on last week's episode. He says, yes, I'd say that the chances are very good that is something that Disney and Lucasfilm would want to happen. The question is if Jon Favreau is on board for it. And that would be a major commitment depending on what that director, who has done quite the diversity of content relating to theatrical releases, from Lion King live action to Iron Man to Chef to the smaller films that he's done in the past. You know, who knows where Jon Favreau is in his life in terms of his professional career, but becoming the Feige of Star Wars in Kevin Feige and what he is to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I mean, that would pretty much dominate all of his time. But as always, Star Wars Santa, it's great to hear from you, and thanks for writing in to the podcast. Listen, that wraps up the show for this week. Again, I hope you'll take a moment and check out my science fiction space opera series. In book 1 of EMBARK, Taft has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. When ship mechanic Taft Guardia agrees to help starfighter pilot Keitha Morrow, who he's secretly in love with, investigate a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father, they embark on a perilous journey of discovery amid a looming planet-wide industrial catastrophe. In the middle of a global evacuation, 2 rival megacorporations are on the brink of interstellar war as Taft, Keitha, and their ragtag crew discover what may be the only hope of saving Earth's evacuees from annihilation. Pick up book 1 today in this fast-paced and action-packed science fiction adventure before the price increases. Both the ebook and the paperback are priced to sell. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member now or this holiday season with science fiction. I wrote these stories for adults, but they are great for ages 11 plus in terms of the violence. No language involved. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today, though. Again, available in hardcover, paperback, Kindle Unlimited, ebook, and audiobook. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with really cool technology, romance, and a ton of action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Head on over to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, EMBARK, and John, Jon, Justice. I really would appreciate it, and it's how you can support this show. And with that, I hope that you're heading into Halloween, you're already enjoying your precursor to the holidays, and that wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. Thank you so much for spending some time with this week's episode. I hope you'll like and subscribe so you never miss any show, and you'll check out my science fiction adventure series today. Head on over to Amazon.com. Until next week, God bless, and I'll talk to you then. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.